um, both an architect level thinker around both user experience, digital experience, as well as some of the technology platforms that we work in. So I think you'll enjoy this. I know there'll be plenty of time for questions. And I'm going to turn it over to Virgil. And please enjoy and ask questions when you can. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Joel.
Yep.
All right, let's go ahead and get started. Like Joel said, today we're going to talk about building content models and some of the things that you can do around that. So I appreciate everybody joining me today. So I highly doubt we're going to all be here an hour, but we do have quite a bit of information to go through. So during the process, if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the Q&A, and we'll try and answer them probably towards the end of the session itself. Okay, so a little bit about me. My name is Virgil Carroll. I'm the owner and principal human solutions architect at HiMonkey. I actually originally hail from the great state of Alaska. Anytime you hear me do anything, I'm talking about things from a user experience perspective. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is not only about maybe how to make your lives a little bit easier, but also kind of how that can affect kind of the end user experience and how they interact with you in digital channels. I've been building websites since 1998, and since we do a lot of intranet work, I wanted to mention that I've been doing SharePoint since 2001. So let's start a little bit talking about what content modeling is. Content modeling is kind of a little bit of an abstract process when you start talking about it from kind of a content strategy side. Otherwise, what we do with content, when we think of content, we kind of think of content as the written word and everything else about that. But what we don't often think about is kind of how that all works together and how we can kind of put this together. So a lot of the samples that I'm going to show you today and a lot of the discussions I'm going to go around is around kind of the way you might approach this from, say, like a college. And probably one of the reasons is I've done a lot of modeling around that. But two, I think it's also a very clear model to kind of understand. But, when you think about content modeling, it's really about structuring your content, actually understanding it. Don't really confuse that with information architecture, but more think of it from understanding semantically kind of how your content relates to one another, interacts with one another, and kind of how you can do it. And really the ideal state from this is you're taking your content and you're really getting it to a point in which really what you can do is you can not only have a very clear, certain message and way of delivery, but on top of that, you also have this ability to say, update it in a single location and kind of have it affect a lot of different things, and you don't have to constantly be rewriting the same things over and over and over. So from that side, that can be a real benefit. So besides structured content, content models can really help align your goals and messages. So a lot of times as we start kind of going out there and building a lot of different content in that, we can get confusion. And it relates really the semantical relationship. And if you're not sure of or have not heard the phrase semantical relationship, we're talking about how content kind of relates from a metadata standpoint, otherwise how it kind of interconnects from concept to clarity in that. Why do we need this? Well, some of the common things we see is first is your content can tend to be stale, and what I mean by that is sometimes your content gets old out there, and a lot of times one of the biggest factors that really cause that is not only just not taking the time to update individual pages, but at the same time, a lot of times, especially in larger websites, you tend to deliver the same message over and over in a lot of different places. And in a not very well-built content system, you have to find all those places to deliver that message. So typically what's happening is as a site kind of grows organically and things kind of get to a much higher level and much more complex in its management, you start picking and choosing the places where you're going to update this content, and yet your visitors and or people that are interacting with you are finding this very old content that almost could have a contradictory message or something that really goes along there. So one of the challenges that we run into that content models can really help us understand is kind of how we break down our content in the first place, so that we can kind of help prevent in the future, after a rewrite, of our content going stale. On top of that, another thing that our content can kind of help is how it really makes sense. And so a very typical thing we see in content that tends to have a lot of issues is overall your content makes sense, but the problem is the people that it makes sense to is you. You understand your product, you understand your service, you really understand everything about your organization, and sometimes that gets us to have a little bit of filtered lenses on ourselves to kind of look at it and say, well, this makes sense to me, so why wouldn't this make sense to somebody else? And part of our content can kind of be as we model it out and kind of really understand what our content's there for, who it's for, that kind of stuff. Sometimes you can also help identify some of the confusions that come from those messages, where you realize that you have content that's really to an audience that is not going to understand every nuance inside your organization and really how to write in that manner. And the last thing, and probably one of the more common things we hear, especially today when we're going through website redevelopments and that kind of process, is that, how do you really translate your content from just delivering it on the web or just delivering it in some type of print mechanism, and really kind of going what they call omni-channel, otherwise that you can kind of take this content and you can kind of push it out and that kind of stuff. And so again, kind of one of the challenges is a lot of times these activities tend to be very segmented. So you've got people working on your print work, you've got people working on your website, you've got people working on maybe your digital channels that you're doing, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, all those kind of things. And then maybe even you have another one, like maybe you have an app for your organization and you have people working on that. Well, the problem is that as you start to, again, we know that websites can really individually grow out of control, and all these individual channels can grow out of control. Well, now you've exponentially added the amount of out of control and misunderstanding you can have about your content by really kind of pushing it out to even these further levels. So part of understanding that model is really how your content interrelates, really is understood from one another. And what that can really help you do is really kind of help you be able to have a better strategy of pushing these out through these different content channels. So how do we start? Well, that's a really great question. Before I start, I want to make sure that you understand a few basic principles that are very important. The first thing is, I don't want to kid you, this takes time. Unless you happen to have a very simple content structure and you don't really have a lot of content you need to deliver, which then honestly I would say, probably a lot of this practice isn't very helpful for you. It's going to take a lot of time and a lot of understanding and a lot of people to be able to really put this together and make sure it happens. There is no quick fix for you. One of the realities that you have in these type of models and these type of systems, these kind of methodologies, is where they're going to create a much better long-term experience, and down the road it's going to be much easier for you to manage and everything like that. From that starting point where you're actually having to figure this all out and map it all out and do everything that you have to do inside there, it's going to take a lot of effort to get there. You're going to have to go through a lot of processes to get there. The good news is once you get there and you have it all mapped out and you have it everything, you're going to have a clarity that you've never really had before on your content, and you're going to be able to use that clarity really to really kind of make some better choices and make better implementations of your content across and everywhere in that. So, but you just need to understand this is going to take some time. There is no silver bullet that's going to make this easy. It takes understanding. You're going to really have to dig a lot deeper into how you understand your content and your services and your products and everything else like that. And it's going to take people. And so one of the things a lot of organizations have an issue with is kind of really staffing something like this really appropriately and understanding that there's amount of time that it takes to go through this. So I want to start from the other side and say, well, what about the people we're trying to service? Well, one of the things is, and honestly, I've been using this slide in almost every presentation I've ever given, because I think it's very important for people to kind of set the mindset of, you're delivering this to people outside your organization, or actually you could be delivering it to people inside your organization. But overall, you're developing it to people that are not you, that don't have as intimate of understanding, of your content as you probably do. So you need to kind of understand this. Really quick question is that, when people think about the internet, they think, well, I just ask a question, I want to learn something, I want to know something, some kind of magic happens there, and then I receive an answer. The reason why this is very important is that you really have to set your mindset of people when they deal with these digital technologies and all this kind of stuff, even phones where you might say people are better technology users. Overall, they just really understand. I click a button, I press something, I do something like that, and something happens. They have no understanding of all the complexities around it. The same with your content. If your content's very confusing to do, you're kind of going to miss the point of where they're trying to get. So let's talk a little bit about content itself so that we kind of put ourselves in the framework of what we really need to do to kind of build that model. And the first thing you have to understand is there's really kind of three pillars that we look at. So first is every piece of content in every organization has a purpose. And one of the big things is you need to understand that purpose inside there. So whether it's folks external to your organization or people inside your organization, every person has a reason for using that information. So the first thing is to kind of really understand what that means from that side. So if you're trying to promote some new service, you might be, part of that purpose might be that you're trying to make sure that they know that you're the lowest cost, or you might be sure that they know that you have a flexible model or that you're following good practices, whatever it is. But there's that piece of content and it has it in there. And so what you really have to do is you kind of have to get around that hypothetical versus actual purpose. And what I mean from that is a lot of times from a marketing perspective, we tend to look at this and kind of portray a purpose of content that we're saying this is what we want the person to think on the other side when they read this. And so what I mean is you also have to look at the other side and say, well, learn what they actually do think on the other side. So if you are conveying a new marketing message and you think it's some tongue-in-cheek thing that everybody's going to think is really funny because you think it's funny and you think it's very humorous, you might on the other side find out that on the other side when somebody reads it, they don't really find it that funny because maybe there's some type of organizational context you need to understand that stuff, or maybe there's they just need to have your type of sense of humor to really kind of get that. So when you start talking about content have a purpose, you have to understand it, and you really have to kind of take it there and align your goals around the purpose of that content in there, because sometimes what you think is the purpose is not often what other people think is the purpose of that content as well. That equally goes in importance to every piece of content has its own language. So one of the probably the most common things that we see about that, especially when you start talking about complexity of content and how we model it, is that an organization tends to model their content around themselves. And when they start modeling it around themselves, they tend to model it around the language that they use to describe themselves. So we see this a lot, especially when you start getting to more technical organizations, government agencies, and that kind of stuff, where often content is written and described in the way the organization sees itself, using its own language. So whether it's acronyms or whatever like that, there's a lot of complexity that goes in there. And again, one of the things that kind of the content modeling process can be is when we start to understand kind of how our content is connected, how people really relate to it, and all those kind of things, we can kind of start to really take that next step of really kind of moving in a direction where we can start to understand how we need to actually use the language and how we actually have to do things from that side. And so what can be very helpful is that once you kind of understand that language and you kind of understand where it's going and where it comes from and how to do it, you can start to kind of better align yourself by having better discipline around how you use language and how you communicate out to your end users and everything else from between in that. And the third area I want to just make sure, and I've kind of talked about this throughout the last two, but that and I realize I don't have the correct bullet points here. I apologize. I don't know what happened there. But content is consumed by people. So going real quick into the summary there, not only does every piece of content have a purpose, and every purpose could be different, and every content has a language, and the language may need to be interpreted for different audiences. But on top of that, every piece of content is being looked at by different people, and every different person has different wants, they have different needs, they have different understandings of you as an organization in that. And it's very important to understand that. As a matter of fact, we would have a ton of success in this world if we could just get rid of this whole group and not have any people view our content, because there'd never be any worries about misunderstanding or anything on top of that. But the reality is that we have these groups and we have to do this kind of stuff. So we really have to understand these people in that. So the reason I kind of bring these points up before I kind of move into content modeling is that that is really what you've got to understand, is you've got to understand how your content kind of is before, kind of where those deficits are, and then how we can do something different. And typically the areas are is we tend to self promote or self understand in our content, so we're building our content the way we kind of see ourselves, and not really looking at that lens from another person's viewpoint and really kind of understanding where that might go. So how do we go from here? Well, let's talk a little bit about content modeling and how we actually go through that process. So content modeling is really based off the concept of content as a service. Otherwise, one of the things is anybody who was around kind of in the infancy of internet and kind of digital communications know that content tended to have a very one-to-one relationship for itself. And again, earlier I kind of talked about that one of the biggest problems that we run into from a content side is we have content that kind of constantly needs to be updated, and depending on how we've actually implemented that content, we may have to go multiple places to actually go in and do that. And so a good part of that can be that we actually can go through and we understand that. So one of our ideals here is that we actually get to the point in which we look at content as a service. Otherwise, content is kind of a component which can be used for a lot of different reasons. And so the ideal is what we call the COPE process, which is create once, publish everywhere. Otherwise, you're taking a piece of content, you've got it so well understood and so well done that that piece of content basically is here, and all you got to do is write it once, and then you can reuse that piece of content anywhere you go. So how are we going to get there? Well, we're going to look at how you model your content, how we really figure out the types of content inside there, and then how we're going to break down our information on top of that, and then how we can kind of publish that across multiple channels in there. So, but COPE is a very important thing that we look at from that side, that we really want to know is kind of how to be able to do that from there, and is really a good philosophy, because that's really the point of this process, is trying to make it so that down the road when we have to manage these things, we can actually manage it from an easier level, and we don't have to do a lot of work around that from that side, and that we can kind of do that from a very simple standpoint down the road. So all I have to do is implement one piece there. So let's look at a model and let's kind of talk about it. So I'm going to do a scenario kind of around a college program. So we have a particular college program that some college has out there that we're really trying to look at from there. And so when we start talking about model, we start trying to break down, and we start trying to look at the relationships with other things that we have out there. So every college program probably is dependent or belongs to some kind of department out there. So you could have an accounting college program that's part of maybe a finance department, or educational department, or maybe it's an accounting educational department or something. But that every single one kind of belongs to a department. And so inside that college program too, every college program that offers degrees, it could be a master's, it could be a bachelor's, could be an associate's degree, it could be a lot of different things like that. And to be able to kind of be able to actually get your college degree and do that stuff, you're going to have some type of schedule. So you're going to have some type of schedule inside there where the different classes that you need to take and all the different semantics in there, and all those classes are going to be offered at some type of campus. So you have it there. You might be a college that only has one location, you might be a college that has many locations, but overall the concept is you have all this stuff that kind of exists from there. And then you have a cost associated with that. So every college program has costs that go along with it, and kind of there. And then you have the faculty that actually teach these classes. So you have all these different pieces here that kind of interrelate to a single college program. So a college program belongs to a department. You have a schedule for it. You're going to take the classes on campus. Maybe it's online and that kind of stuff. But these all kind of have these connections in there. And so then on top of that, what you're really looking at is, so, okay, I've defined kind of, we have all these different entities that relate to a college program. Well, now maybe there's some information inside these entities that I want to understand. So maybe for a college program, and you could call this metadata, we're looking at, okay, so we have what it's called, the description, maybe some other ways. So, an accounting program could also be a CPA program. You could have those things. Maybe any acronyms that are used for it, from the standpoint of, like if you're going for a master's of business administration, it's called an MBA, that kind of stuff. But overall, you have kind of this different information. From a degree, you may have things, again, like, what kind of degree is it, the description, what type is it, a master's, is it a bachelor's, is it an associate, is it a certificate, whatever it might be, how many credits does it take to look at that. From a faculty member, you might be who that is, what their credentials are, how long they've been teaching. I mean, there's a lot of different things that you can kind of plug into here. From a faculty perspective, is that information that you kind of want to know about that faculty member, what classes they teach, all that kind of stuff. But once you kind of start having that, then you also look at those relationships from that side. So a college program probably belongs to a department, as I said before, in that, and then is offered on campus, at a campus somewhere. But then you kind of take it to another step, and you also have this cost. So you kind of have these three levels there, where it's like, okay, I belong to a department, I'm offered on a campus or campuses, and there's some cost associated with it. Well, then you kind of take it another step further, and we talked about kind of the degree being in there as well. But then we look at some of those interrelationships and say, well, yes, a faculty member teaches a college program, but most likely they belong to the department where the college program is offered. Therefore, the faculty member is really part of the department, and the department is part, where the college program is offered. We have schedules, so the classes that we take, again, kind of the same type of concept. Yes, a schedule is for the college program, but it's probably offered at a campus or online, so that actually can relate to the campus, and the campus can relate in there. But then you could also have cross-functional, where actually, well, a schedule that's going to be offered on a campus is probably part of being taught by a faculty member that is part of a department. So you can start to see kind of these interactions from there and that. And so where this really gets you to, and where this really gets you kind of when you start to look at all of these relationships in here, is that you can start to look at it. Well, I could go to the department page, and from the department page of the website, or some other mechanism that we're delivering this in there, I'm going to see all the college programs that are offered, potentially all the faculty members that are a part of that, and kind of all the associations that go inside there. Where if I'm going to a degree page, say I might learn what college program it's part of, maybe the faculty members that are associated with it, and that kind of stuff. Where 3, if I go to the schedule, kind of the same type of thing. I'm going to look at the schedule. The schedule has a faculty member associated with it. It's part of a campus, which is part of a, and then what college program it resides in there. And so overall, you've kind of looked at this. Well, where does this really kind of give you a good advantage? Well, when we look at that, in a very simplistic format, we can kind of look at this and say, well, this can really do it. So now I go to a college program, and I have all this interrelated information, which is maybe different chunks of content that go in there that really kind of make up the totality of what a college program is, yet these are separate entities that kind of relate to one another. But then I flip it over and I go to the department. Well, I don't have to really rewrite all the content, because I have that same kind of semantical relationship between those content, and I understand that a department has a faculty that are associated, it has locations on campuses, it has the degrees offered, the programs, and that. And then I go to a campus location, and I can understand where departments are located, where classes are, faculty, and that. So there's really a lot to this, and that's really the important part. But being able to map out those things can really kind of help you understand some of those differences and similarities in how that content really kind of relates and interacts with one another, and what that can really do from the standpoint of kind of your content creation and content management, is that you can start to see that how this pattern could really support, well, I only have to build this piece of content once, but if I understand the relationships between the other, now I can maybe surface that into other areas, but overall I only have to do it in one location. So from there, what we want to look at is we really want to understand, okay, but what types of content are we going to be delivering inside there? So once you kind of have the understanding of how everything interrelates, now you want to start talking about, okay, from a content delivery standpoint, how are we going to kind of differentiate these types of content and what kind of content is really out there. So content types structure and store chunks of information. So one of the very useful things from this side is now you kind of have your model. You can think of content type more as how do we make up the metadata and all the different pieces that go in there. When you think about a page content type, and in that you could have some type of piece of content that now you need an image associated with it, you have text associated, a title with it, you have all these different kinds of components that kind of make up this process, and so types can be really seen as representing main content categories. So these could be kind of your different types of content that you have, and what type of information you need to support that. Don't only think of this as web. You could also be expanding this out to, like, if you're doing some type of Twitter campaign, or if you're doing an Instagram post, or if you're doing something in Facebook, all these things need different pieces of information and different things to really kind of relate it. Yet it all may come from the same core of information. So you may have some article you wrote on your website that now you need to start thinking about, okay, for that article, for my Facebook campaign, I'm going to need a good representative image. I'm going to need, a strong title and a good brief description that's going to attract them and go there. Where for the page itself, you're going to need the images that go along with the article, links to other resources and that kind of stuff that are inside the article news. Where in a tweet, you just need the 164 characters that you can put in the Twitter feed and that. So you really need to do it. So one of the things to do is really create a list of content types for your project and map the content already created or that you need to create. So this is a great point in which, once you kind of understand your model and now you understand the types of content you would want to really create to support that model, then you can kind of look at, okay, what do I have out there that already works and where do I need to map things in there. And so in looking and breaking this down, there's kind of a lot of different methodologies you can do it. One that I like is kind of using what they kind of consider the content lifecycle approach in that. So, when we actually look at this program, okay, now, we have kind of these four areas. First, we're trying to build awareness through awareness content. So this is taking it out of the side of just looking at a website or something individually. This is looking more at a digital campaign type of thing. So maybe some of the ways we're doing it is some of the social media posts that we have around our content. Maybe we're trying to post to educational blogs because we're doing this for our college setting in that. And maybe some of the print advertising or digital advertising, maybe we're doing, Google AdWords, or we're doing some kind of thing in there. But overall, we're looking at this different type of content and saying, okay, how do we take this content and really make it available for these types of scenarios. And then we're really trying to create interest. So now we've gotten some awareness. People know who we are. So now we're doing some things maybe a little bit more specific. We're highlighting our faculty. Maybe we have some videos around our programs. Maybe on our homepage of our website, we're highlighting different programs that we want to kind of push out to the student populace and encourage them to sign up for, and that kind of stuff. From a desire thing, now people are actually, in the content lifecycle, you're now building content that is more around people have actually generated a genuine interest in your thing, and now they actually want to learn more and make sure this is kind of the right fit. So, maybe some of the content we'd be looking at for there is student stories, so kind of sharing other people that have been successful in your program or at the school. Career information, what's my options once I get done with this? Where am I going to go from here? And kind of that. Cost breakdowns, that could be a really significant one, from the standpoint of kind of the end users, and really kind of understanding, what the costs are going to be associated with it. And then we kind of have the last step, which is action. And so this action, we're looking at, okay, how do we really get them to be successful in this? How do they apply to college? How do they reach out for more information and that kind of stuff? So really what you're trying to see here is that you're kind of taking this model and saying, okay, we've kind of figured out the model and kind of everything around it. Now we're kind of looking like, what are all the things around that we're going to need to support that model to really kind of meet our goals? And so you're not only modeling your content kind of from a reusability standpoint, but you're also looking at it, from the standpoint of there. But you can see here, when you actually look at all this content here and these different ideas for content, you can actually see, well, if we have a good centralized location for kind of our cost breakdowns as part of our model, then we can pull that into this right here. The same as if we have little snippets of the program and that kind of stuff from our well-written program content, you can start to pull that into the social media posts. The same as if you have a lot of the information that you feel like people are going to want to know about your faculty that you're going to share out, now you have these faculty profiles that you can do in that. So it's really about taking that model and kind of looking at how that all really interrelates with one another, and how that really gets to the point in which you can really kind of look at this from a global standpoint. So once you've kind of figured out these types, then you can kind of look at it from mapping it to the where, the who, and the how. And so what that really means is, let's go back here and let's just say that we're taking like, faculty profiles or something like that. Where is this going to be used? So here's where you kind of start taking it a little bit step further and saying, okay, now I understand, to be successful and promote the program, I really need to highlight some of the really great faculty members that we have in our organization. Now, to promote those faculty members in our organization, I need to really think about where I'm going to do that. So this is where you start mapping to where, the who, and the how. So the where could be, maybe I'm going to have a page on the website that has something about it. Maybe I'm going to have some little snippets that's the faculty member's name, a little picture of them, and then maybe just the highlights like 10 years of experience or something like that. And I'm going to want to have that as a reusable element on the website, so that if you're looking at like a degree page, you can see that and highlight that faculty member. Or if you're looking at like an in the news, you can pull that faculty member's thing, but you're able to use that. And then maybe there's some snippets. Maybe there's 5 or 10 little blurbs that you want kind of around that faculty member that you can kind of reuse over time to be able to send out Twitter posts, or that kind of stuff, or the instructor in action teaching, like that. But you're kind of looking at how you're going to really use this content and how you're going to use it. So you're going back here and saying, okay, these faculty profiles, how am I going to get from here to and really take this kind of to the next level and really get this to the place. So you're taking this faculty profiles here, and you're really kind of looking at, okay, what can I do from here? Basically, where am I going to put this all out? And then you're looking at the next step, which is kind of, okay, well, how does that actually translate into also delivering this to people in that? And so oftentimes one of the things we have to think of from a content is we have the centralized content, but does our tonality really fit the audience that we're trying to do? So if you have some understanding your audiences, so you may want, and you may want to go another step further and actually do some different targeting to specifically to students, and how you kind of convey the message to students versus a parent versus a school counselor that maybe is looking at this stuff around this and that. So part of that is really understanding, okay, now I understand how I'm going to push this out, the where, on the website, through social channels and that. Now I want to understand kind of who's my audience that I'm trying to push that to, and what I am in there. And then the last one is really you're looking at, okay, well, where am I delivering this? Obviously, if you're putting something on the website, it's going to be very different than if you're doing something on a Twitter feed, and that kind of stuff, or something via print mechanism. So really, in understanding these things, you've mapped out your content so that you have a better understanding of that. And now you're looking at the types of content that you really want to be able to help deliver that. And now you're looking at where and who and how you're going to deliver that to, and really kind of breaking that all down. And so, and I apologize, this is kind of a little bit small, but I couldn't get it to be bigger, and in that. But look at this. I'll tell you one of the probably the most common things we hear, especially in collegiate settings, is about tuition. So one of the, I've worked with a lot of colleges throughout a lot of years, and one of the most common things we hear from that is people kind of complain about their college, or their tuition rate being different everywhere across their site because somebody added to their piece of content, somebody put it on their page, and it's kind of a constant battle for colleges around that side really to do that. Obviously the ideal way to do it would be that you have your financial rate and it gets updated everywhere. But part of that challenge is also the different ways we do it. So we look at this reusable content piece, which is tuition. Okay, so we have this kind of reusable content piece of tuition, and from tuition here, we really look at this and we go, okay, what are the different ways that I might need to deliver tuition in that? So I understand that tuition is part of every program cost and that kind of stuff, and I could have put costs up here. So one way I may want to deliver it is cost at a glance. So something very simple. Maybe it's just the per credit hour. It could be, or some type of simple way just to say, hey, usually it costs this to come to this school, and that. And then I look at the channels where I'm going to do that. Okay, so where's this going to potentially go? Maybe this is going to go on our new student promo page. So when you come to the website, you do that. Maybe we're going to want to post some of this to some of our social channels to know, hey, look at how cheap it is to come here. And that kind of stuff. Or maybe it's going to be part of some of our advertising campaign in that. But this is one way to deliver. So you have this cost of tuition. You're now kind of summarizing that in a very simple way to kind of get that out to multiple channels. And then you kind of look at that on top of that and you go, well, another way that we commonly see or that we commonly need is really to have a detailed cost breakdown. So now we're talking about the cost per credit hours plus the fees you have to pay, plus the different services you have to do, books, all that kind of stuff. So now you're going to really need this kind of another view of this cost that is much more detailed that people can use from that. And so now you might see that more in like you actually go to a financial aid page, or maybe it's in some programs page, but financial aid page where you really can see the breakdown of the costs of college. And maybe there's some type of cost calculator that's going on in there. But again, it's the same type of content. It's a very different view of it, but overall the same basic pieces apply to it that kind of get you to this spot right here. And then another common way that we see it is cost comparison in that. And so from a cost comparison side, you want to maybe look at, okay, what is the cost of our college versus 4 other area colleges or whatever it might be, and that kind of stuff. Again, that might end up going on the new student promo page. We might make some tweets around that. We might do a lot of different things. And then the last one being a cost calculator. Now you want to actually give the person an opportunity to do that, and maybe that's part of financial aid. So where does that all really come to? Well, that comes to, you have this central piece of content and you have this kind of core message you want to deliver is about our tuition. We've identified 4 different ways that you could actually deliver that, in all the different ways that that piece of content may be used by your organization to deliver it. And so really what you get here is you start looking at it. Now the ideal is then that there's some type of core metadata here with the tuition that basically all I have to go into is this tuition piece of content or whatever it might be, and I actually have to say, okay, now our tuition instead of $100 per credit is now $200 per credit or whatever it might be. And that cascades down in all of our different channels that we're doing things get updated from that. But in this particular situation, often we're going to be doing it at this level because even though this is all the same content, this is a detailed breakdown. This is comparisons to other schools. This is, you know, a real quick snapshot. So now we look at it and maybe we're making the update here, here, and here, and here, and you're actually updating and you say, well, that's not all down to one spot. But that's not always the point of content modeling. The content modeling is not always publishing one specific thing and it cascades everywhere. It's about really understanding how this all kind of breaks out and how this relates. So now imagine if you were a college that had, you know, 100, 200 programs offered from it, and all of them needed to represent some of this information. Imagine having to go to those 100, 200 programs to update that information and what you were going to miss in people that used it there. So what you're looking at now is that potentially if we use it in this methodology, we now have 4 places we need to update this content. And those 4 are going to be used across all those different systems to kind of promote, to push that content in there, and we now have a much more consistent message that we're doing, and we don't have to worry about it. As a matter of fact, about 5-6 years ago, I worked with a college here in the state of Minnesota, and they had a huge problem with this, and one of their the commitments that their president had made to kind of promote their transparency of the university was that if somebody found a tuition cost on some page on their website or from some of their promotions that was supposedly current, that they could take that to the registrar's office and the registrar would actually honor that cost. Well, this ended up being an activity that really backfired on them because it ended up that they had no concept how many locations on the website actually had very wrong tuition data in that. And so that kicked off a big process of them really kind of going through and trying to actually figure out, understand that tuition data, understand where it all was, and come to some type of model such as this, where people weren't really adding that to their content. They were taking these snippets, these content chunks, and adding these content chunks to their content as well. So there is a very practical use to this, but there's also a very substantial use that if you kind of understand all this stuff together, you can really kind of consolidate and simplify the way you're doing this. Now the reality is where when you actually get it to its final stage, it becomes a much simpler process. There's a lot of work to get there. And so today was just an effort to kind of walk you through some of the content modeling concepts and to really kind of give you some high level understanding of really how you do this kind of stuff. I hope there were some good examples there, and I hope it kind of resonates with you and gives you some ideas on some of the things you can do. But, you know, to kind of summarize here, you know, content modeling is really about creating some discipline in your content creation. It doesn't necessarily stand alone by itself. This is something that probably integrates very well with some of the current processes you do through content creation and that. And it really is not something that like is supposed to stand alone and be a solution. It's really something that is like implementing this inside your already known processes or upgrading your process or whatever it might be can really kind of help make this a much more disciplined process where you're actually looking at things. And it really does 2 sides. It really does from the one side, it really kind of gives you the opportunity to really kind of understand your content better, but on the other side, it really gives you an opportunity to govern your content better in what it is. It takes time and effort. I know I've said that a bunch of times, but I want to make sure. But it also helps you better understand your messaging and what you're trying to do with it. One thing that I like about it is kind of integrated with if you do things like personas and that kind of stuff, you really have a lot of power to kind of take that and do something else with it. And it creates a more consistent delivery. But that's probably the biggest and the most successful end result we can get out of this, is that if we do this all correct, then frankly our delivery mechanism from going forward should be a lot simpler, should be a lot more consistent in that. So If you're interested in learning more, obviously I'm going to be doing a couple other sessions here. Again, these are not necessarily interrelated sessions. They're very specific topics, but they're topics that I feel strongly you can kind of bring into there. But if you want to learn more about kind of this and actually get some models that you can actually use to start doing your modeling and your content mapping and kind of all those different processes, I really recommend the Content Strategy Alliance. On their website, you can go to their Tools and Templates Best Practice Handbook, and it's actually a downloadable PDF that you can get. And in there, in the PDF, it actually clicks to a bunch of Excel spreadsheets and Word documents that they've created. They can kind of give you a very good starter template to kind of go through and start mapping out your content from that side. So. Thank you, everybody, very much. I hope you enjoyed this time. I'm going to leave it open right now for any questions that maybe people might have, and we'll stay on for a couple minutes for that.